They faced the void alone. Then Earth's war fleet arrived and shattered the darkness. Part 1. The lights were dying on station. One by one, the powered sections went dark as the generators failed. Commander stood in the command center, his 4 arms gripping the console edge hard enough to leave marks in the metal. Through the viewport he could see them. The black ships, hundreds of them, floating in the darkness like wounds in space itself. The Void Collective had been here for 18 cycles. 18 long, terrible cycles of watching his people die slowly. First, the outer defenses fell. Then the supply ships tried to run the blockade. None made it. The Collective's ships moved through space like sharks through water, silent and deadly. Now the last shield generator was failing and knew what came next. His second officer, Al, approached with her antennae drooping low. She was young, barely past her first molt. Too young to die like this. They were all too young to die like this. "Commander, the shield will fail within the hour," she said quietly. Her voice carried the clicking undertone of their language, but the translator rendered it flat and emotionless in standard. "Should I order the civilians to the inner chambers?" His mandibles clicked together in frustration. The inner chambers, as if walls of metal would stop what was coming. The Void Collective didn't just kill, they absorbed. They took your mind, your memories, everything that made you who you were, and they fed it into their hive consciousness. You became a ghost inside their collective nightmare, aware but not yourself anymore. 47 civilizations had learned this truth. 47 species now existed only as whispers inside the collective's vast mind. "Yes," he said finally, "gather everyone, I will speak to them." The central chamber of station had once been a place of joy, gathered here for festivals, for the great molting ceremonies, for celebrations of new life. Now it held the last 3,000 souls of their colony. They looked up at with their compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights, and he saw fear there. Raw, honest fear. "My people," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber without need for amplification. "I will not lie to you. The shield fails soon. The Void Collective will come for us. The Galactic Council has declared us strategically indefensible. No help is coming." A ripple of despair moved through the crowd. Parents pulled their larvae close. The elderly bowed their heads, but raised all 4 arms high. "But our ancestors survived the ice age of our. We built ships when we had nothing but determination and hope. We will not go into the darkness as prey. We will stand together. We will meet our end with dignity." It was a good speech. He had practiced it. But standing there, looking at the faces of his people, felt the weight of his failure. He had sent distress signals, begged the council for aid, called out to every fleet within range. Silence. Complete silence. The galaxy had decided station was not worth saving. The shield generator gave a final, groaning whine and died. The transparent barrier that had kept them alive flickered and vanished. Through the viewports, the void ships began to move forward. Al's console lit up suddenly. She stared at it, her antennae twitching in confusion. "Commander, I'm reading a spatial distortion. Large, very large." "The Collective's reinforcements?" asked bitterly. "No, sir, this is different. The signature is wrong. It's coming not from collective space." She tapped rapidly at her console. "Commander, the mass readings are impossible. Either our sensors are failing, or something the size of a small moon is about to drop out of faster-than-light travel." Moved to stand beside her, reading the data himself. His training told him the sensors had to be malfunctioning. Nothing that large could move faster than light. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical, but the readings kept climbing. 200 distinct signatures, all of them enormous, all of them moving in perfect formation. "Broadcast on all channels," he ordered. "Demand identification." Before Al could comply, space tore itself open. That was the only way could describe it. Reality split apart in a line of brilliant white light, and through that tear came ships. Massive ships. Ships that made the Void Collective's fleet look like insects by comparison. They emerged in perfect geometric formation, moving with a precision that spoke of either incredible technology or incredible discipline, possibly both. The lead ship was the largest vessel had ever seen. It stretched for kilometers, bristling with weapons and armor plating. Its hull was painted a gray-white color, and along its side were symbols he didn't recognize. Human letters, his database informed him after a moment of searching. Terran alphabet. "They're human," Al whispered in shock. "Commander, those are human warships." Knew almost nothing about humans. They were a young species from the far side of the galaxy, barely space-faring by galactic standards. They had only made contact with the broader galactic community 50 standard years ago. The Council considered them provincial, aggressive, and not worth much attention. Too warlike, the reports said, too quick to resort to violence. Looking at the fleet that had just arrived, thought perhaps being warlike was not such a bad thing. The Void Collective's ships responded to the new arrivals. The black vessels began to spread out, forming their standard envelopment pattern. Had seen this before. They would create zones of absolute darkness, areas where light itself couldn't penetrate. Inside those zones, they had total control. It was how they had destroyed every fleet sent against them. The human fleet didn't pause, didn't hesitate, didn't even broadcast a warning. They just opened fire. The universe became light and thunder. Thousands of projectiles streaked from the human ships, moving so fast they appeared as solid lines of light. They weren't energy weapons. Sensors identified them as simple kinetic rounds, solid metal moving at incredible speeds, primitive by galactic standards. But when those primitive weapons struck the void ships, they punched straight through the black hulls and exploded out the other side in clouds of debris. The Void Collective tried to create their darkness zones. Space itself seemed to bend and twist as they activated their ancient technology. But the humans didn't stop shooting. If anything, they increased their rate of fire. Where the Collective expected careful, targeted shots, they received walls of metal moving at relativistic speeds. The darkness couldn't stop physics, couldn't stop momentum. Watched in stunned disbelief as a void destroyer simply ceased to exist, torn apart by the impact of hundreds of rounds. Another collective ship tried to retreat and was caught by what appeared to be nuclear detonations. Actual nuclear weapons, who still used nuclear weapons in space combat. Apparently humans did. "They're not even slowing down," Al said, her voice filled with awe. "Commander, the human fleet is advancing straight into the collective formation. They're not trying to maintain distance. They're charging." She was right. The massive human dreadnought led the way, its armor plating absorbing hits that would have vaporized a normal ship. Behind it, smaller cruisers and destroyers spread out, creating overlapping fields of fire. The Void Collective's perfect darkness zones became shooting galleries. The humans couldn't see inside them, so they simply filled the entire space with projectiles and explosives. One of the void ships managed to get close to a human cruiser, saw it attempt to deploy boarding tentacles, the black appendages that would allow it to breach a hull and begin the absorption process. The human ship's point defense systems activated. Dozens of smaller weapons opened up, cutting the tentacles apart before they could make contact. Then the cruiser rotated, presenting fresh weapons, and turned the void ship into expanding gas and metal fragments. The battle was not graceful. It was not elegant. The humans fought with a brutal, straightforward efficiency that made warriors' hearts sing. They didn't try to outmaneuver their enemy. They didn't attempt clever tactical gambits. They simply brought overwhelming firepower to bear and refused to stop until their targets ceased to exist. In the command center of station, 3,000 watched through the viewports as their enemy, their unstoppable nightmare, was methodically torn apart by a species most of them had never heard of. Parents held their larvae and wept. The elderly clicked their mandibles in warrior salutes. Al turned to with her antennae high and proud. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel. Audio only." "Put it through," ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was female, calm, and carried an accent translator struggled with, but the words were clear enough. "Station, this is Admiral Sarah of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. Sorry for the delay. We're here now. Please stand by while we clear the area. Out." The transmission ended, stared at the speaker for a long moment, then looked back at the viewport. The human fleet was driving forward, relentless as a tide. The Void Collective's ships were breaking formation, trying to retreat, but the humans weren't letting them go easily. "Sorry for the delay," repeated softly. He felt something wet on his face and realized he was crying. Around him, his people were crying too, crying and laughing and holding each other. Help had come. Against all odds, against all reasonable expectations, help had come. And it had come in the form of 200 human warships that fought like the universe owed them an apology. Part 2. The battle raged for 6 hours. From his position in Station's command center, watched the tide of destruction sweep through the Void Collective's fleet. He had fought in wars before, had commanded ships in combat, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Their ships took damage that should have crippled them and kept firing. One destroyer lost its entire forward section to a void weapon, but continued to engage with its aft guns until a human repair crew sealed the breach and brought the forward weapons back online. It took them less than 30 minutes. 30 minutes to repair battle damage that would have taken a shipyard weeks to fix. "How are they doing that?" Al asked, echoing's thoughts. She was tracking the battle closely, her natural tactical instincts fascinated by what she was seeing. "Their damage control capabilities are beyond anything in our database." Study the tactical display. She was right. Human ships didn't rely on shields the way most galactic species did. They had shields, but they seemed to treat them as a first line of defense rather than their only defense. Behind the shields came layers of armor. Thick, heavy armor plating that shouldn't be practical on a ship moving faster than light. And behind the armor came redundancy. Multiple backup systems for every critical function. If one reactor failed, they had 2 more. If a weapon turret was destroyed, the crew just rerouted power to the adjacent turrets. It was inefficient, it was inelegant, it was brutally effective. A Void battleship, one of the massive command vessels that coordinated the Collective's hive tactics, tried to create a zone of absolute darkness around itself. The space around it twisted, light bending away until the ship became a hole in reality. Most species would have fallen back, unable to target what they couldn't see. The humans fired anyway. They calculated the battleship's last known position and trajectory, then filled that entire section of space with projectiles. Rounds, missiles, torpedo spreads, and something that appeared to be magnetically accelerated debris. When the darkness zone collapsed a minute later, the Void battleship was gone. Just debris and expanding gas remained. Receiving another transmission from the human fleet, Al reported. "It's addressed to you specifically, Commander." "Put it through." The same female voice from before came through the speakers, but this time there was strain in it. Battle stress. Admiral was fighting a fleet engagement while taking time to talk to him. "Commander, this is Admiral. We're going to start boarding operations on the remaining Void vessels. My Marines will be going in hard. If you have any intelligence on the internal layout of collective ships, now would be a good time to share it." His mandibles clicked in surprise. Boarding operations. The humans were planning to board Void collective ships. No one boarded collective vessels. The interior was a nightmare of twisted space and mental attacks. The absorbed minds of 47 species whispered in those corridors, trying to drive invaders insane. "Admiral, I must advise against boarding operations," he said quickly. "The collective's ships are designed to corrupt the minds of boarders. You will lose your soldiers to absorption." There was a brief pause. Then Admiral's voice came back and could hear what might have been amusement in it. "Appreciate the warning, Commander, but our Marines have training for hostile mental environments. We'll manage. If you have deck plans, please transmit them to the Indomitable. Out." Al looked at. He clicked his mandibles in a gesture of uncertainty, then nodded. "Transmit everything we have on collective ship designs. If the humans want to try boarding, we should help them, even if it's futile." But it wasn't futile. Watch through his sensors as human boarding craft launched from the fleet. They were small, fast, and ugly. Just metal cylinders with engines strapped to them. They accelerated toward damaged void ships at speeds that should have turned their occupants into paste. At the last moment, they fired retro thrusters and slammed into the collective hulls hard enough to breach straight through the armor. The first boarding action took place on a void cruiser that had lost its engines. Managed to hack into the collective ship's internal sensors, expecting to witness a massacre. What he saw instead made him question everything he knew about warfare. The human Marines came through the breach wearing heavy armor. Not elegant powered suits like most species used, but thick, practical armor covered in equipment pouches and weapon mounts. They carried kinetic weapons, simple slug throwers that would have been at home on a battlefield 1,000 years ago. And they carried something else. Tanks. Actual tanks on their backs. Flamethrowers. The collective's absorbed minds reached out, trying to invade the Marines' thoughts. Could see it happening on the sensors. Psychic tendrils of corrupted consciousness probing at the humans. And the humans just kept moving forward, burning everything in their path. One Marine stopped, shaking his head as if clearing away cobwebs. His companion grabbed his shoulder, said something through their communication system, and they kept advancing. The whispers of 47 dead civilizations couldn't stop them. The twisted corridors didn't confuse them. They navigated by simple compass and dead reckoning, burning their way through bulkheads when the corridors became too warped to traverse. "They're immune," Al whispered. "How are they immune?" Didn't have an answer. He watched as the Marines reached the collective ship's core, placed explosives, and evacuated in less than 10 minutes. The ship exploded from within, its twisted architecture collapsing into normal space as the core failed. This pattern repeated across the battlefield. Human Marines boarded ship after ship, fighting through conditions that had destroyed the sanity of countless warriors from countless species. They lost soldiers, saw Marines fall to collective weapons, saw boarding craft destroyed by lucky shots, but they kept coming. For every Marine that fell, 2 more pushed forward. The Void Collective, for the first time in recorded history, began to retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal, a rout. The remaining ships broke formation and fled into deep space, their perfect hive coordination falling apart into individual panic. The humans pursued them to the edge of the system, destroying stragglers before Admiral ordered a halt. Silence fell over the battlefield. Stared at the tactical display, which now showed 200 human ships holding position around station. Debris from nearly 70 void vessels drifted in clouds around them. The nightmare that had held his people hostage for 18 cycles was over. "Commander, the humans are requesting permission to dock," Al said quietly. "Admiral wishes to meet with you in person." Straightened all 4 of his arms, forcing himself to stand with proper military bearing. "Grant permission, prepare a greeting party, and Al, make sure everyone knows. The humans saved us. Whatever they ask for, whatever they need, we will provide." The docking took an hour. Human engineers helped repair station's docking clamps, which had been damaged in the siege. They worked efficiently, without fuss, solving problems with practical solutions rather than elegant technology. One engineer simply welded a broken clamp shut rather than waiting for a replacement part. It worked. Admiral Sarah came aboard with a small security detail. She was shorter than expected. Humans were generally smaller than, but in his mind he had built her up to be a giant. Instead, she was a compact woman with gray hair cut short and practical. Her uniform was neat but showed signs of wear. A scar ran along her left cheek, old and healed but still visible. Her eyes were dark and tired, the eyes of someone who had seen too much death. Bowed deeply, all four arms spread in the traditional gesture of profound respect. "Admiral, you have saved my people. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." S translator rendered her response with what hoped was accuracy. "No debt, Commander. We heard your distress call 3 weeks ago. Earth High Command doesn't believe in leaving people to die alone in the dark. Simple as that." Simple as that. As if traveling across a quarter of the galaxy to fight an enemy that had destroyed 47 civilizations was simple, led her to the observation deck, where they could see the human fleet holding position. Up close, he could see the damage the ships had taken: scorch marks, holes in armor plating. One destroyer was missing an entire weapons turret. "You took casualties," he observed. 17 dead, 43 wounded. 2 ships need major repairs." His voice was flat, factual. "Could have been worse. The collective's weapons are nasty, but they rely too much on psychological warfare. My Marines are trained for that. Therapy and mental conditioning before every deployment." "Your Marines went into ships filled with the absorbed minds of 47 species and fought through them," said. "That is not normal, Admiral. That is not something training can prepare you for." Was quiet for a moment, looking out at her fleet. "Commander, Earth went through a difficult period in our history. We had wars, bad ones. We learned things about psychological warfare, about breaking minds and rebuilding them. We learned things we're not proud of, but we learned. And when we went to the stars, we brought that knowledge with us, not to use on others, to defend against it." She turned to face him directly. "The Void Collective tried to break my Marines' minds, tried to make them see things, hear things, feel things that weren't real. But my people have dealt with trauma before. We know how to recognize when something isn't right in our heads. We know how to push through it. And we know how to help each other when the darkness gets too close." Clicked his mandibles in understanding. "Your species weaponized therapy." "I wouldn't put it that way, but yeah, essentially," smiled slightly. "We figured if humans can survive and recover from our own worst impulses, we can survive anything the universe throws at us. Turns out we were right." Around them, civilians began to emerge from the inner chambers. They pressed against the viewports, looking out at the human ships. Some were crying. Others stood in silent awe. A young larva, barely old enough to walk, approached and touched her hand with a tiny claw. The Admiral knelt down, her armored suit joints hissing slightly. She spoke softly to the larva, and though the translator struggled with the gentle tone, the meaning was clear. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Felt something shift in his chest. This human, this warrior who had led 200 ships into battle against an enemy that terrified the galaxy, was kneeling in the debris of his station, speaking kindly to a child she had never met. This was what humans were, not just warriors, protectors. Part 3. The days following the battle were strange for. Human engineers worked alongside repair crews to restore the station's critical systems. Human medical personnel treated the wounded and sick, sharing their techniques with doctors. Human Marines stood guard at key points, not because they didn't trust but because they wanted them to rest. Admiral established her command post on the observation deck, coordinating with her fleet while simultaneously working to ensure the station's needs were met. She moved between military briefings and civilian aid requests without missing a beat, treating both with equal importance. On the third day, the Galactic Council finally responded to distress signals. A formal delegation arrived on a Council diplomatic ship, their ornate vessel looking absurdly fragile next to the battle-scarred human warships. The delegation consisted of 3 species, a all-flowing robes and crystalline intelligence, a massive and amphibious, and a whose multiple eyes scanned everything nervously. They insisted on a formal meeting, arranged it in the station's council chamber, which had somehow survived the siege intact. He invited Admiral, though he suspected the humans would not appreciate what the council had to say. The diplomat, whose name translated as Harmonious Crystal Song, spoke first. Its voice was beautiful, like wind chimes in a breeze. "Commander, the Council is pleased to see you survived your ordeal. However, we must address a serious matter. The human intervention in this system constitutes a violation of established protocols." Felt his mandibles clench. Beside him, Admiral sat perfectly still, her face neutral. "What protocols?" asked carefully. "Station was declared strategically indefensible," the rumbled. "The Council made the difficult but necessary decision to abandon this position to minimize further loss of life. By intervening, the humans disrupted a sealed tactical assessment." "You left us to die," said flatly. "You declared us indefensible and left us to be absorbed by the collective." The multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "It was a tragic necessity. Resources are limited. The Void Collective is too powerful. Better to preserve forces for defending systems that can be held." Admiral leaned forward slightly. When she spoke, her voice was polite but cold. "Let me make sure I understand. You decided these people weren't worth saving, so you abandoned them. And now you're upset that someone else didn't abandon them." "The situation is complex," Harmonious Crystal Song said. "The galactic order depends on careful resource management and strategic calculations. Emotional responses to individual situations, however tragic, cannot be allowed to override pragmatic decision-making." "Pragmatic," repeated. The word came out like something bitter. "You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." The shifted its massive bulk. "Admiral, we respect that Earth is new to galactic politics, but you must understand the reality. The Void Collective has existed for. They have destroyed 47 civilizations. Fighting them directly is futile. The best strategy is containment and strategic withdrawal." "Strategic withdrawal," said. "That's a nice way of saying you run away and let people die." "We preserve the greater good," Harmonious Crystal Song insisted. "If we spent resources defending every isolated station, we would have nothing left for core systems. This is basic strategic doctrine." Stood up. She wasn't particularly tall, but something about the way she moved made everyone in the room focus on her. "Let me tell you about Earth's strategic doctrine. We have a rule. A simple rule that guides everything we do out here in the dark. We don't leave people behind. Not our people, not our allies, not anyone who calls for help. Because the moment you start making calculations about who deserves to be saved and who doesn't, you've already lost what you're fighting for." "That is inefficient," the said. "Maybe, but it works. Your collective problem, we just solved it. Your unstoppable enemy ran away from us. They're currently fleeing toward the galactic rim, and our long-range scouts say they're not stopping. You know why they ran?" Smile had no warmth in it. "Because we showed them that someone was willing to fight back. That someone refused to accept their dominance as inevitable." Watched the Council delegation exchange glances. The spoke hesitantly. "Admiral, the Council will need to review Earth's actions here. There will be a formal inquiry. Your intervention, while appreciated by Commander, sets a concerning precedent." "A precedent for what? Helping people?" shook her head. "You can have your inquiry, but let me be clear about something. Earth doesn't recognize the Council's authority to tell us who we can and can't defend. We heard a distress call. We responded. We'll keep responding. If that's a problem for you, that's your problem, not ours." The meeting ended badly. The Council delegation left with stern warnings about disrupting galactic order and the need for proper procedures. Saw them off personally, then returned to find Admiral standing on the observation deck, looking out at Earth's fleet. "They're going to make trouble for you," said quietly. "Let them try," replied. "Commander, can I ask you something? How many times did you call for help during the siege?" "Every day, sometimes multiple times a day. We sent distress signals to the Council, to nearby systems, to commercial shipping lanes, to anyone who might listen. And no one came. No one except us turned to face him. That's the galaxy your Council has created. A place where people die alone because someone decided they weren't worth the resources. That's not a galaxy I want to live in, and it's not a galaxy I want my children to inherit. Over the following weeks, the truth of the situation became clear. Within days of the battle, 17 minor species formally requested defensive pacts with Earth, not with the Galactic Council, with Earth specifically. They had heard what happened at Station. They had heard that when everyone else abandoned, the humans came, and they wanted that protection for themselves. The Council was furious. They called emergency sessions, passed resolutions condemning Earth's military expansionism, demanded that Earth cease operations outside their designated territorial space. Earth's response was simple and direct: no. Watch the political situation develop from Station, which was now repaired and functioning better than it had before the siege. Human engineers had improved the shield generators, upgraded the sensor arrays, and installed new defensive weapons. Not because Earth claimed the station, but because they wanted to make sure it could defend itself if the collective ever returned. Admiral remained for 3 weeks, helping coordinate the defense of nearby systems and training local forces in human tactical doctrine. On her last day, she met with one final time. "We're leaving a small fleet here," she said, "2 cruisers and 4 destroyers, just until you get your own defensive fleet rebuilt. Commander will be in charge. She's good people. You can trust her." "Admiral, why are you doing this?" asked. "Not just the defense, all of it. You don't benefit from protecting us. Earth gains nothing but enemies on the Council." Was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, do you know what happened on Earth about 200 years ago?" Shook his head, his antennae curious. "We nearly destroyed ourselves. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, the whole nightmare. We came within days of extinction, but we survived. We pulled back from the edge, and we learned something important." She looked out at the stars. "We learned that survival isn't just about being strong enough to protect yourself. It's about being good enough to protect others. Because the moment you stop caring about anyone but yourself, you become something not worth saving." The Council would say that's naive. The Council has forgotten what it's like to face extinction. They've gotten comfortable, safe. They make their calculations and their strategic assessments, and they forget that every number in their reports is a living being with hopes and dreams and people who love them. Turned back to him. "Earth remembers. We remember what it's like to be alone in the dark, waiting for help that never comes. We swore we'd never let anyone else feel that way, not if we could help it." Clicked his mandibles in understanding. "You fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." "Something like that, though I prefer to think we're fighting to make sure nobody has to fight alone." Extended her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "Take care of yourself, Commander, and if you ever need help again, just call. We'll come." As Shuttle departed, stood on the observation deck with Al. The human fleet was preparing to leave, but 6 ships remained behind, taking up defensive positions around the station. "Do you think they'll really come if we call again?" Al asked. "Yes," said without hesitation. "They'll come. That's what makes them different from the Council. The Council makes promises they can break. Humans make promises they'll die to keep." News of the battle spread through the galaxy. The Void Collective's retreat became public knowledge. The 17 species seeking Earth's protection became 30, then 40, then 60. Small species, minor civilizations, colonies on the edge of known space. All of them asking for the same thing: someone who would defend them not because it was profitable, but because it was right. Earth accepted them all. The Galactic Council raged and threatened, but they couldn't stop it. The balance of galactic power was shifting, and everyone could feel it. The age of careful calculations and strategic abandonments was ending. A new age was beginning, one guided by a simple human principle: no one should have to face the darkness alone. 3 months after the battle, received a message from Earth. It was simple and direct, carrying the signature of someone called the Secretary General of the United Earth Government. It read, Commander Earth formally recognizes Station and the people as allies and friends. Should you ever require assistance, you need only ask. We will come. This is not a strategic calculation. This is not a temporary arrangement. This is a promise, and humans keep their promises. Welcome to the family. Read the message 3 times, then carefully saved it to the station's permanent records. He thought about the Admiral's words, about fighting so nobody had to fight alone, about remembering what it felt like to face extinction, about making the galaxy a place worth living in rather than just surviving in. They had faced the void alone, waiting for help that seemed like it would never come. Then Earth's war fleet arrived and shattered the darkness. But more importantly, they arrived with a message. Nobody has to be alone anymore, not while humans have anything to say about it. Looked out at the stars and clicked his mandibles in something close to contentment. The galaxy was changing. Maybe, just maybe, it was changing for the better. And it was all because a young species from a distant arm of the galaxy refused to accept that anyone should be left behind. The darkness was still out there. The Void Collective would return someday. Other threats would emerge. But for the first time in a long time felt hope. Because when the darkness came again, he knew humans would be there to face it. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And that made all the difference.